Hey guys, this is Dawson Discussions, and my name is Nathan L. Dawson Jr. Today's date is May 7th, 2022. Today I will be talking about group politics in the context of empowering Black America, so stay tuned. Politics. Politics is the set of activities that are associated with making decisions in groups or other forms of power relations among individuals, such as the distribution of resources or of status. So my personal politics are not really rooted in liberalism or conservatism or by being a member of the Republican Party or the Democratic Party, but rather I am rooted in Black nationalism. So, to put it simply, Black nationalism actually advocates the belief that Black people should seek to develop and maintain a distinctive racial, cultural, and national identity, which is not correlated to mainstream civilization that they're physically located in. So Black nationalist activism actually revolves around social, political, spiritual, and economic empowerment of Black communities, especially to resist assimilation into the mainstream civilization through integration or otherwise, and to maintain that distinctive Black identity. So subsets of it are, well, one, Black determination. Black determination states that Black people, based on respect for the principle of equal rights and for equality of opportunity, have the right to freely choose their sovereignty and international political status with no interference. Two would be Black self-sufficiency, the state of being in which Black people need little or no help or interaction with others, in this case, U.S. society as a whole. Self-sufficiency entails the self being enough to fulfill their needs, and a self-sustaining entity can maintain a self-sufficiency indefinitely. Three, Black separatism. Similar to Black self-determination, it's the Black racial and ethnic separation from the larger group, and from the larger group would be the U.S. society as a whole. And four, lastly, Black solidarity, which is an awareness of the shared Black interests, objectives, standards, vision, and sympathies by creating a psychological sense of unity among Black people, regardless of their class status. So where did I kind of sort of got the ideology from? Of course, if you heard of Malcolm X, that's one influence, but my more favorite influence would be Dr. Claud Anderson. Dr. Claud Anderson, he is one of my favorite pro-Black authors, and he actually wrote this book, Powernomics, a National Plan to Empower Black America, which came out in the year 2001. So a little bit of information about Dr. Claud Anderson. Well, Dr. Claud Anderson is the president of Powernomics Corporation of America Incorporated and the Harvest Institute Incorporated. So essentially, Powernomics is a company that publishes his books and also produces multimedia presentations in which he explains his concept, Powernomics. So Powernomics is a package of principles and strategies he developed to explain the concept of race and to offer a guide for Black America to become more economically and politically competitive group in the United States of America. So again, with this book, Powernomics, the National Plan to Empower Black America, this book, he incorporates and reflects his past experiences, his academic research, his business experience, his business acumen, both as an owner and a capital provider, and his very political positions. So he had held the highest positions in federal and state government and politics. He was the state coordinator of education for Florida under Governor Reuben Askew during the 1970s. So after successful social reform projects in Florida and leading up to President James Carter's Florida campaign to win in the state, President Carter then appointed Dr. Anderson as the federal co-chairman for a commission of governors in Southeast states. And that position, being rank of Assistant Secretary in the United States Department of Commerce, he chaired a commission, funded and directed economic development projects for the governors in those states. The projects he funded created jobs and businesses in those states. As executive director of 2 economic development corporations for the city of Miami, Florida, he oversaw funding for more than 30 businesses. Although he has been a political independent for many years, he was a major planner and coordinator for the 1988 Democratic Convention in Atlanta and has taught at all levels of education. And also, Dr. Claud Anderson is also president of the Harvest Institute, which is a nationally recognized think tank that does research, policy development, education, and advocacy to increase the self-sufficiency of Black America. So the key word in the title of the book is power. And of course, what is power? Well, Merriam-Webster dictionary defined power as, able to influence things with very little resistance. And again, based off the topic of this video is politics. And of course, Merriam-Webster defines politics probably as activities that relate to influencing the action and policies of a government or getting and keeping power in a government. For example, he is an important figure in American politics. For a sentence, or the students discuss the latest news in national and local politics, for example. Number 2, the work or job of people such as elected officials who are part of a government. She plans on going to politics, as in she plans on entering politics. She plans on getting a job that involves politics. Definition number 3, the opinion that someone has about what should be done by governments, a person's political thoughts and opinions. For example, she has changed her politics. His politics are very liberal or very conservative, like that. Now, Oxford Dictionary defines the word politics as the activities associated with the governance of a country or another area, especially the debate of conflict among individuals or parties having or hoping to achieve power, as in the president's relationship with Congress is vital to American politics. And of course, the common word in the definition is power and influence. Again, going back to the term power. The definition of power is various and conflicting. This is due mainly to this multifarious nature of power itself, rather than due to its unreality or ephemeral spirit. Few, if any of us, doubt the reality of power and the tangible effects its application engenders. Our confusion as to its exact definition more likely flows from the fact that power, depending on the context and circumstance, assumes ubiquitous shapes and forms, varying degrees of transparency and invisibility. Visibility. Power is a chameleon. It takes on the texture of its environment. Influence as power. So influence occurs when a person acts in compliance with the wishes or directions of suggestions of another, based on a shared positive regard for love or admiration of the other, or based on a desire to please and serve the other because of the other's personal significance to him. Influence is achieved when the subject's behavior compliance is attained through the influential party having to possess or use force, coercion, material rewards, or make appeals to authority. This is especially the case when the subject complies with the wishes, suggestions, or commands of the other while engaging in no relevant, independent, or deliberate thinking, reasoning, or rational processes, whatsoever, or when the subject complies out of a conditioned habit of obedience in regards to the other. And of course, the biggest question that many people in the black community ask, at least politics wise, is how can Black America become more politically relevant? Well, the way how Dr. Claud Anderson sees it, politics is all about power. In a competitive society, there is little, if any, incentive to look out for an underdog group. Black Americans have always been excluded from playing politics by the official rules of the game. Every time we sought to play by the rules change, or the game has already ended before we already had the chance to play. But in all instances, we must adhere to the fundamental rule of all politics: quid pro quo. What for what in Latin, used in English to mean an exchange of goods or services, in which one transfer is contingent upon the other, a favor for a favor. Black voters are led to believe that there are only two purposes of voting: to elect a white candidate who is best able to lead and control the resources, or to elect a black candidate who is most deserving of a public job and personal recognition. We play politics just to play, but other groups, they play for the benefit of winning or being in a winner's circle. So in the book, Powernomics, Dr. Claud Anderson, he have a chapter on group politics, and he have a 12-step on what Black America has to do in order to become more politically competitive and more taken more seriously as a political voting bloc. So here are the steps, 1 through 12. Okay, step 1, promote group self-interest and use political acts to empower Black America. So according to Dr. Claud Anderson, Black Americans are bound together by many forces and factors: racism, heritage, descendants of slaves, descendants of abolitionists, descendants of sharecroppers and tenant farmers, affected by immigration and overall victimization. So Carter G. Woodson wrote in his 1936 book, The Miseducation of the Negro, another book that I have, urged Black people to support their own people first. Unfortunately, many Blacks perceive any move towards group self-interest as a move towards hate, even also with other ethnic groups. more particularly white Americans. Also, mostly black overclass, like the black candidates, black office holders, certain black ministers, black business leaders, black investors, black civil rights representatives, and black celebrities and entertainers are usually susceptible to that kind of thinking. Also, they want to represent all people. Now, National Association for the Advancement of Colored People, or NAACP, represents colored people. The National Urban League represents the welfare of poor people and the multicultural. But at the same time, who then is representing the political interests of black Americans? And from how I see it, they really don't. They don't really represent the political interests of black Americans. How so? Well, there's actually a policy called benign neglect that many people are willfully ignorant to, or they think that it really isn't that much of a big deal. But actually, benign neglect is actually a very big deal. How so? Well, essentially, benign neglect is a policy proposed in 1969 by Senator Daniel Patrick Moynihan, a Democrat, who was at the time on President Richard M. Nixon, Republican, staff as an urban affairs advisor. While serving in that capacity, Moynihan sent the President Nixon a memo that suggested the time may have come when the issue of race could benefit from a period of benign neglect. The subject has been too much talked about. The former has been too much taken over to hysterics, paranoids, and bottlers on all sides. We need a period in which Negro, as in African Americans, or black Americans, progress continues, the racial rhetoric fades. The policy was designed to ease tensions after the civil rights movement of the late 1960s. Moynihan was particularly troubled by the speeches of Vice President Spiro Agnew, Republican. However, the policy was widely seen as an abandonment of urban neighborhoods. Black people living in those urban neighborhoods, particularly ones with a majority black population. As Senator Moynihan's statements and writings appear to encourage, for instance, fire departments engaging in a triage to avoid a supposedly futile war against arson. And now suddenly we have these liberally politically correct terms that black people are lumped into, which eludes our quest for power. For example, person, people, communities of color. You might think it actually means non-white people. Sure, it does, but more specifically, it actually means first-generation immigrants to the United States after the signing of the 1965 Immigration Reform Law. Because when it comes to immigration, all the way up until the signing of that law in 1965, most of the immigrants mostly came from Western European countries, maybe Canada and, maybe Australians. But for Latin American, Arab, and Asians and Africans, it was very difficult for them to get into. Now, after the signing of that law, the 1965 immigration law, now it's easy for Latin Americans, Arab nations, and Asian countries to actually come into the United States. That's actually why Asian Americans are the fastest growing immigration population. Second would be the Hispanic Latin American communities. And then and then you have like the Arab nations, like all these immigrants. Most of them are usually coming from Latin America, Arab nations, and Asian Americans. Asian countries. And of course, I guess these days there's really not a whole lot of Western European countries, or at least Western Europeans, immigrating to the United States. So person, people, communities of colors are usually those first generation immigrants to the United States after the signing of the 1965 Immigration Reform Law, who usually come from Latin America, Arab nations, and Asian countries. Again, minority. Minority actually means white women because of the feminist movement, and they actually benefit the most from affirmative action. And also you have the white LGBTQIA community because of the more recent LGBTQIA plus movement in the recent decade and previous decade. Again, you also have marginalized groups, which black people are lumped into. That actually kind of a little bit broad and ambiguous because you can also be discriminated, or you could be marginalized or discriminated against due to your religion. Arabs for Islam, which is called Islamophobia. Jews because they practice Judaism, anti-Semitism, and the non-theists, like the atheists, agnostics, agnostics because of their lack of an organized religion. And also sexual orientation, going back for marginalized groups, LGBTQIA and their homophobia that's actually going around in the United States. So again, with all these terms like marginalized groups, minority, person, people of color, doesn't really mean black people only. It actually means those other groups to take priority over black people. And again, as a black person, whenever another black person uses those terms, I kind of have to side-eye them because it doesn't really mean black people. It actually means other groups who are also marginalized because we think that we're the only marginalized group, but there's also other marginalized groups that we probably know that, we're not the only marginalized group. It's kind of hard for them to explain, but you kind of know what I'm getting with this. Okay, another term, Black and Brown Coalition. According to Dr. Claud Anderson, in a 1990 census, 85% of those listed as Hispanic classify themselves as Caucasians. This ethnic group is the fastest growing population that is challenging blacks for their numerical and political dominance as a minority, which it is not. Hispanics have enjoyed the benefits of having it both ways. First, they criticize white society for its disproportionate share of wealth and political power. Then, two, they classify themselves as Caucasians. So essentially, these groups classify themselves as Caucasians for political and social purposes, but then again, they're going to classify themselves as minorities for cultural reasons and in order to qualify for governmental programs. And that actually was a quote from Dr. Claud Anderson's other book, or his first book, came out in August 1994, I believe, which is called Black Labor, White Wealth, The Search for Power and Economic Justice by Dr. Claud Anderson. Fantastic book. So if you're black and you're watching this video, I recommend you read Black Labor, White Wealth first, and then second, jump into Powernomics. Fantastic book. Speaking on, and I was sticking with the Black on Brown Coalition, which I don't really believe in. You also have Michael Lind, and he wrote a book called The Next American Nation. He spoke of how Hispanics inherited affirmative action and other programs that are originally designed to help Black America because black leadership failed to protest it. Lind said, one by one, Hispanic mayors will replace the black mayors. Hispanic contractors will edge out the black contractors. Hispanic quotas in education and hiring will increase. Hispanics will then demand their own congressional districts at the price, if necessary, of the destruction of black majority districts. Lind expressed amazement that the black leaders would allow white women and ethnic minorities to replace blacks. He wondered what black civil rights leader would have said in the 1960s, had they known that within one generation, the primary beneficiaries of affirmative action and other civil rights initiatives would be well-to-do white women, Asians, and Hispanics. Most of these Hispanics are classified as white and lived in Mexico, Cuba, Salvador, Honduras, and Guatemala for decades after the end of the civil rights movement, yet now they have displaced blacks. How do today's leadership justify their active role in helping women? Whenever they talk about women, chances are they're probably talking about white women. Hispanics, Asians, and other immigrants capitalize on black issues and then edge out and subordinate blacks. Okay, moving on with Dr. Claud Anderson's action plan. Step 2, challenge immigration laws and public policies that have forced black people to become this nation's only non-immigrant and permanent minority. In the mid-1700s, blacks made up 34% of the total population, a little more than one-third. After ratification of the Naturalization Act of 1790, citizenship was restricted to free white persons. Immigration laws have controlled black population numbers. Again, when I told you about the 1965 Immigration Act, and not only that, it was very difficult for other racial minorities like Asians and the Hispanic, Latin, and Arabs to enter in the country. But then again, moving on, over the centuries, ethnic immigrants have bumped blacks from employment, business, contracting, vending, education, land ownership, and political opportunities, and used them as a buffer against hate groups. Layer after layer of ethnic immigrants received the advantage of the fruits of black people's labor and consumer markets. Throughout most of the 19th and 20th centuries, black leaders were aware of the negative impact immigrants had on black Americans and petitioned the federal government to halt open immigration until the nation had rendered justice to black Americans. In the mid 1960s, black leaders made two dramatic reversals that were to have everlasting effects on blacks and from which they would never recover from. Also, in the book Immigration Reconsidered, Lawrence Fuchs published a widely immigration and ethnic study describing the chain of events. In the mid-1960s, Cuban immigrants were flooding into Miami and displacing blacks from their service jobs. Though blacks were economically devastated, Martin Luther King Jr. decided not to pit black economic needs against the desires of Cubans to come to this country. He referred them as struggling minorities, and the die was cast. Almost all black leaders bought the social accommodation script. Fuchs stated, in part because of King's inspiration, almost every black leader in the country, including the mayors of several large cities and leaders of national organizations, signed an advertisement for the International Rescue Commission in 1978, headlined, "Black Americans Urge Admission of the Indo-Chinese Refugees." So, black people suffered a double loss with their leaders reversed their attitudes about immigration. Not only were the needs of black Americans subordinated, but so were the needs of the people of African descent outside of the United States of America. Okay, Dr. Claud Anderson, step 3 for black group political empowerment. Use vertical integration in politics, like the old political war system, to deliver services and direct benefits to the black community. Okay, so a form of vertical integration must be applied to politics in order to position black Americans to gain access to a higher socioeconomic footing. Vertical integration will give black Americans a vertical structure or channel that allows public office holders to deliver constituency services directly to black voters. Early in history, the word ward actually meant someone who was to be protected. To protect voters, cities were divided into wards that public officials could easily identify and guard. The ward system was a political division of a city, as well as a political tool and patron system. So, immigrants used the ward system to look after the most important needs. Ward politics were vehicles that aided European immigrants in direct exchange for their political loyalties. Immigrants were able to build institutions, savings and loan associations, social clubs, youth clubs, summer camps, sports associations, as well as corner grocery stores and other businesses that provided jobs to the community. Black people should demand that black politicians and black public servants have direct control over political resources for political patronage. Can actually be built around 1, maintaining family and community ties, 2, pooling and sharing resources, and 3, exercising competitive self-interest in the marketplace. Oh, and I almost forgot. Number 4, mutual obligation between black people. Okay, moving on. Step 4, support a national network of black research institutes to collect data, advocate for, and craft group-based how-to-win political strategies. It is imperative that Black America have scholars and institutions to conduct ethnographic research for the purpose of political and economic empowerment. The majority society has well over 1,200 public policy institutes or think tanks, as well as thousands of university-based research institutes, whose sole purpose is to bring concentrated brain power to bear on every conceivable issue. These public policy institutes vary ideologically from ultra-right conservatism to middle-of-the-road moderateism to ultra-left liberalism. Now, the needs and deserves research and viewpoints that are from a black perspective of life. Black people need to research organizations that would develop policy and blueprints to help Black America achieve self-sufficiency and competitiveness. To maximize their effect in communities, the local think tanks should affiliate with black colleges and universities, business organizations, and churches that also subscribe to the Powernomics vision. Okay, step number 5. Create a daily national print and electronic news talk show that offers black political perspectives on domestic and international events. Information is power. The saying sounds good. However, information in and of itself is not power. Information represents only the potential for power. If we as Black Americans are serious about acquiring power, we must have the national network for information and news. We need to communicate information, strategies, and ideas that connect the group and establish a potential for unity and consistency of message. A black communication network would increase group power, especially when the information being disseminated is linked successfully with the group's vision, goals, and aspirations. Mainstream media like Fox, CNN, ABC, CNBC, OANN, ABC, and so on and so forth, the mainstream media outlets out there, does not provide information that focuses on what is helpful to Black America. Blacks must then develop both print and electronic media in order to practice group politics very effectively. Few Black newspapers are viable today, and most of them are now dependent upon and controlled by white politicians and their business allies. Okay, step 6. Establish national political debates, issue forums and conventions for politicians that is seeking Black votes. Black Americans must lock all candidates for public office and current elected officials into quid pro quo contracts with Black communities. Ever since America's foundings, public debates have constituted a major part of the election process. Debates are used as settings for candidates to present themselves and their ideas to the public. So essentially, they give the public a chance to get to know the candidates and seek support for issues and projects. Black people must require all political candidates for public office to participate in Black-hosted national and local debates, town hall meetings, and other public forums, and to respond to questions about their commitment to Black empowerment issues. First, it will make Black America a part of the political process in a meaningful way. Second, it will bring respect to Black people and their voting power. Third, it would allow Blacks to regain some control over politics within individual Black neighborhoods. Fourth, Black America would have a chance to interact with candidates on key issues and extract irrevocable agreements between candidates and Black America. And fifth and last, the publicized national debates would stop candidates from public office from taking Black Americans for granted by saying one thing to Blacks, then saying something totally different to another group or community about the same issue. Any candidate or office holder who does not provide acceptable answers to Black questions for politics should not get Black votes at all. Step 7. Block vote upon quid pro quo agreements between politicians, their parties, and Black people. The strongest weapon in Black America's political arsenal is the block vote, BLOC. The block vote. No other group, not white women, Hispanics, white senior citizens, or whites in general, vote as a block. Black America has the distinction of typically aligning to one single national political party. From 1865 to the 1930s, we voted Republican Party. And from the 1930s to today, we vote Democratic Party. Since the last 50 plus years or 60 plus years, neither national political party or white office holders who solicit for our votes have sponsored a program or public policy strictly and solely designed to address the needs and interests of Black Americans. They have never been paid a quid pro quo for their party loyalty and block vote. We must use quid pro quo agreements to ensure delivery of services and economic resources. Okay, step 8. Mobilize a reparations movement with Black Americans in a status equal to American Indians, with legal claims of expropriation of labor, property, and life. So throughout history, our political and legal systems have compensated injured parties, including white indentured servants, the freedom dues, Southern slaveholders because of the monetary reparations and approximately 1 billion acres of land, Japan through the 4-Point Plan, Western Europe due to the Marshall Plan. Marshall, spelled M-A-R-S-H-A-L-L. Marshall, he was a general, army general, and he became Secretary of State for Harry S. Truman. And then, he had the Marshall Plan in order to help Western Europe fight off communism and then repair themselves from the destruction of World War II. Japanese Americans, because of the World War II internment. Jewish people because of the Holocaust, and the Native Americans living on the reservations through additional land, cash payments, and public assistance. So the point is, all these groups receive reparations of some sort for damages done to those groups of people. Black people, victims of the worst Holocaust, have not received compensation for slavery, Jim Crow, and the current policy of benign neglect. Both federal and state governments, through the Bureau of Indian Affairs and state Indian commissions, have historically allocated Indians various forms of compensation, like land, medical services, housing assistance, economic development funds, tools and equipment, tuition-free education, casino licenses, and tax exemption status. And now they are being extended to anyone who can prove that they are Indian, and it's usually white folk. Indians are getting benefits that go back centuries, and blacks are listening to skeptics telling them that they are just not entitled to reparations because slavery ended in 1865 and Jim Crow segregation ended in 1968. Any reparation movement should track Indians as a model and seek similar nation status. Step 9. Use electoral voting options to bypass elected officials and political institutions. So the majority society has been implementing benign neglect since the early 1970s. So again, as I alluded to earlier, or how I said earlier, the concept of benign neglect was coined by the late Senator Daniel Patrick Moynihan, Democrat from New York, in a January 1970 memo to President Richard M. Nixon, Republican, while he served as the latter's urban affairs counselor. The widely circulated memo, which was leaked in the press in March of that same year, read, "The time may have come when the issue of race can benefit from a period of benign neglect." At that historical juncture, Moynihan declared America needed a period in which Negro, the predecessor term to African American, Black American, progress continued and racial rhetoric had faded. Moynihan believed that the anti-poverty programs of Lyndon B. Johnson, Democrat, his Great Society of the 1960s, has failed miserably, not only because they had attempted to use money alone to solve the nation's inability to properly educate the African American poor, but also because they did not raise issues in reference to the viability of integration as a solution to U.S. racial problems. To most liberals, especially many civil rights leaders of the period, Senator Moynihan had provided the rationalization for what Swedish political economist Gunnar Myrdal, in his classic An American Dilemma in 1944, labeled a laissez-faire or do-nothing approach to racial problems. Most liberals at the time thought, and they probably thought correctly, that Moynihan's concept was fatalistic. That is, the intervention of the federal government on behalf of the African American could not alter the inexorable social forces that could be assuaged by local initiatives. In short, the concept of benign neglect, for all intents and purposes, suggested that the social programs that were endorsed and funded by the federal government created attitudes of dependency among the African American poor. In contradistinction to Moynihan's dire assessments, the research on anti-poverty programs conducted by persons as Elizabeth B. Shore, Daniel Shore, Phoebe Cunningham, David T. Elwood, James Comer, and many others, which were based on substantiative, empirical, verifiable data, demonstrated that social programs, when properly planned and executed, succeeded in reducing infant mortality and the incident of low birth weight. Furthermore, programs such as Head Start and Job Corps succeeded in helping to remedy such problems as chronic unemployment and poor school achievement, and aided in the prevention of teenage pregnancy. The aforementioned programs, which had their origins in Lyndon B. Johnson's Democrat Great Society initiatives, helped many African Americans break the cycle of disadvantage. In essence, the concept of benign neglect, which was not based on empirical reality, ultimately blamed the victim, African Americans, and thus ignored the effects of the flawed structure of society in this nation. Nevertheless, there has been a recent revival of benign neglect arguments, which resulted in the 1996 welfare reforms, signed into law by President Bill Clinton, Democrat, and the introduction of the rhetoric of a compassionate conservatism into the presidential campaign of 2000. And of course, George W. Bush, he won that very controversial presidential election because, Bush v. Gore. The whole story of Bush v. Gore. Gore won a popular vote, thought that he won the electoral. Florida was about to recount it. Supreme Court said no, and then they're going to give the election to George W. Bush, Republican. Around that time, just to put things to perspective, I was in kindergarten. Yeah, for the older generation watching, yeah, it's wild that, I vaguely remember that because it was like, I was like kindergarten TV. My vision is, me trying to remember that, it's kind of fuzzy, but I kind of sort of do remember that incident, but not too much in detail. As in, I'm a little bit older, but Anyway, moving on. And furthermore, conservative black politicians and spokespersons have promulgated variants of the concept, which rationalize a terribly flawed social system. So any competitive environment and individual or group that is non-competitive is sure to become extinct. Black Americans must again become active and force those holding public office to be responsible to the needs and concerns of black people. We need to initiate more direct action, whether exercise electoral voting options, alter consumer patterns, or even use forms of civil disobedience reasonably generations ago. There are a number of there's a number of special voting rights that are tools we can use to accomplish our political will, such as voter referendum initiatives, recalls, public hearings, selective withdrawal of patronage, lawsuits, and ballot write-ins. So the laws regarding special rights vary greatly, but all of them are tools we can actually use to gain some degree of control over our lawmakers and hold them accountable. So essentially, a referendum is a direct vote by the electorate on a particular proposal or issue. You have the initiative, which is in citizens participate directly in governance rather than indirectly voting in elections. Those initiatives allow citizens to propose a measure, either a statute or a constitutional amendment, by filing a petition with a specified number of valid signatures from registered voters. And of course, you have the recall, which is the election method in which voters can actually oust out elected officials before their official terms have ended. Okay, moving on. Step 10. Compete with the major political parties by forming a national black independent party as an alternative voting channel. Well, in national politics, there is a long-held common belief that regardless of how this nation's political parties treat black American voters, they accept it because they have no alternative. Black voters are unwanted political pawns, but contrary to common belief, black voters actually do have somewhere to go. They can join the half of this nation's eligible voters who simply refuse to vote. Like myself, I simply refuse to vote. I've already done a video on my view of U.S. politics somewhere in my channel. If you want to know why I personally don't vote, then go on my channel on YouTube and then look for, I think I titled it My Opinion on U.S. Policy, and then you're going to understand where I'm coming from. If you can actually filter out your emotionalism with it, but you gotta watch it with an open mind and not really all antsy about oh, you're black, you're not voting Democrat, oh, you're not voting Republican, yada yada. Watch the video and then you're gonna see what I mean. Anyway, moving on. So essentially, the Democratic Party has been unfaithful to black America. The Democratic Party downgraded black rights and took up with every ethnic, class, gender, and language issue group, regardless of their party affiliations. So after the Civil War, almost all blacks considered themselves to be Republicans. It was a Republican Party that was started by abolitionists and, of course, the party of President Abraham Lincoln. Meanwhile, Southern Democrats strongly opposed any rights to the blacks at the time for almost a century thereafter. Now, African Americans were not allowed to officially attend the Democratic Convention until 1924. Things began to change during the Great Depression of the 1930s with Franklin D. Roosevelt, Democrat, with his New Deal program. Because the New Deal program was a program that helped disadvantaged and minority communities find work. This persuaded 71% of the African Americans to vote Democrat for president for the first time, even though only 44% of themselves considered to be members of the Republican Party. In 1948, the Democrat Harry S. Truman, Democrat, ordered the desegregation of the military, in addition to an executive order affecting racial discrimination of federal employment, securing much of the black vote for the election that year. During that time, 56% of African Americans were now Democrats, so it's kind of almost half and half, but Democrats slightly have the advantage. Well, Democratic blacks have the slight advantage for tipping the block vote for for the presidency, at least. It was the association of civil rights legislation with John F. Kennedy, Democrat, and Lyndon Baines Johnson, Democrat again, that solidified the black loyalty to the Democratic Party for good. JFK proposed and LBJ signed the Civil Rights Act of 1964, which outlawed public discrimination. LBJ's Republican opponent, Barry Goldwater, opposed it, garnering Johnson's 94% of the black vote that year, which was a record until 2008. Johnson later signed the 1965 Voting Rights Act, and of course, if you know history, he then signed the Civil Rights Act of 1968, or the Fair Housing Act of 1968. So by that time, the majority of blacks had became Democrats. By 2016, only 8% of African Americans then considered themselves to be Republicans. Of course, during that election, it was Hillary S. Clinton, Democrat, versus Donald J. Trump, Republican. And of course, Donald J. Trump, he won that election. Although 88% of African Americans voted for Democrat Hillary Clinton in 2016, only 70% considered themselves to be Democrats. Over the last 40 plus years, black Americans have consistently voted overwhelmingly for the Democratic presidential candidate. Quite clearly, what counts is not the political party to which we belong, but the fact that we never had enough political power to do anything within those parties. So in the mid-1980s, so-called progressive Democrats decided to shift away from black people and the image that whites had of the Democratic Party as the party of blacks. In a move that should have been seen as an affront to blacks, powerful white Democrats created the Democratic Leadership Council for the specific purpose of moving the party away from black people and to the center of the political road, meaning being political moderates. It seeks middle-class white votes while still depending on the black vote, even though the party is moving in a more conservative white direction. Both parties have demonstrated their unwillingness to implement a black agenda that provides material benefits to black people, so the choice that blacks should exercise is to pull out of both parties and start an independent national black party that practices group-based politics of gaining resources. Okay, step 11. Initiate a national leadership renaissance for empowerment-oriented black leadership. Black America is poised to slide into political and economic oblivion as a minority in an increasingly pluralistic and competitive society. This is a position of weakness that Black America has to overcome in order to survive and prosper in the 21st century. Black leadership and the respective organizations are trapped. They have painted themselves into a corner of civil rights and integration. Black leadership is being forced to represent all aggrieved groups, even if it is a detriment to their own best interests. Though others practice the politics of gender, ethnicity, culture, class, language, black leadership is prohibited from practicing the politics of race because nearly all the members of the other groups are classified as white. Trapped within their own traditions, black leadership has little choice but to continue the minority coalition building and the politics of rights. Our new black leadership will need a group-based vision. It will have to see, without training, that integration is a tragic failure and is leading Black America into a crisis. The leadership must understand that. And lastly, step 12, we're almost there. Adopt a public code of conduct for group accountability. The temptation is strong to promise things that cannot be delivered or to sacrifice a constituency group for selfish reasons. Black Americans must devise a group code of conduct, role models, and the means to hold people accountable for how they treat black people. Elected officials and candidates should be the first group of people whom black demands accountability. It is especially important for them to hold responsible those blacks who demonstrate more concern for the broader society and its institutions than for the collective interest of black people. So essentially, what we're going to have to do is denounce the black who display inappropriate behavior patterns, ostracize blacks who demonstrate inappropriate behavior patterns, and impose social, political, and sanctions on them because they demonstrated those inappropriate behavior patterns. And holding people accountable to the black community is going to be tough, but it's not going to be for the faint heart. Because politics is competition for essential resources. Those who play politics to get along will usually end up being gotten. Okay, and here are my final thoughts on black group politics in general. If we don't have serious political empowerment by 2030, according to Tony Delarmy over at TD Hip Hop News Media, which is a privately ran independent media that he owns, who is also Haitian in descent. He's very supportive of black political empowerment, black economic empowerment, closing the racial wealth gap, closing the income gap and all that good stuff. A link is going to be in my description. What he said that kind of opened my eyes a little bit was that Black America will be a permanently electoral underclass, because how I alluded to earlier with immigration, the Asian American population, the Hispanic Latin American population, and the Arab American population will outnumber the Black vote because of the immigration and fast track path to citizenship legislation, which is actually going to render the African American vote to be obsolete for either political side to solicit for. And then there will be no need for Black America to vote, since we are a very small voting demographic as compared to other demographics due to their immigration and then, increasing their own size to really influence any election at any level. And then by 2040, then non-Hispanic European descent white population will be the new numerical minority. Now, some Black people think that's actually a good thing because, numbers, and then we can actually use like our numbers to overpower the smaller, because like their population is going down while ours is supposedly going up. But at the same time, by 2050 the median population's net worth will be 0, and then by 2060 the Black population will be number 4th on the population list. Asian and the Arabs is going to be the largest. Then the Hispanic Latin American community is going to be the 2nd largest. 3rd will be the European descent white population. And then Black America will be 4th. And then Native Americans, those who live on a reservation, will probably be 5th. And most definitely Black Americans most definitely can't influence any elections if we're 4th on the population list. And of course, around that time, to put things to the perspective, I'll be retired if Social Security is still around. Of course, I'm not relying on Social Security, but just to put things to context, by 2060, I'm probably going to be retired from the workforce. And of course, at this current trajectory, I don't think Black America will be a socio-economic viable people by the start of the 22nd century, if humankind makes it that far. So the only options I see is that if we really want to be if you actually want to be taken seriously through politics, the only options I see is that if we are an electoral underclass, like if it do happen, like we're electorally obsolete, and we really want to have political power, is 1, we separate from America, renounce our citizenship and form our own nation and self-determine that way. Because if you self-determine, like the gap is gone. Because if you're in America, you have like the white median wealth and then the Black median wealth, and then you have that gap. But if you separate, and then if you leave country, you want to renounce your citizenship, then there's going to be no gap. So again, no racial gap. There's going to be no police brutality, no income inequality, no political inequality, and whatnot. And of course, if we receive flack from critics of it, whether Black or not, for us trying to go that route, then we can restart the reparations conversation because of slavery, Jim Crow, and the current benign neglect policy. And if they say no, then we'll be on the merry way. Or 2, we actually establish a code of conduct to stop their inappropriate behavior patterns and form pro-Black family-orientated households, and then connect group economics, and then outspend our competitors and try to influence politics at all levels with our 527 organizations and our political action communities. If we try to go that way, it's going to be hard due to our numbers in order to outspend our competitors, but that's what we will have to do in order to get representation in government at all levels if we are a electoral underclass as compared to other ethnic groups and other communities who have more political representation than Black America do. So essentially, what's a 527 organization, that you might ask? Well, that 527 organization is actually, 527 group is a type of U.S. tax-exempt organization organized under Section 527 of the U.S. Internal Revenue Code. So that group is actually primarily created to influence the selection, nomination, election, appointment, or to defeat candidates to federal, state, or local public office. So essentially a political action community, or a PAC, or a PAC. is a 527 organization that pools campaigns contribution from members and donate those funds to campaigns for or against candidates, ballot initiatives, or legislation. The term PAC has been created in pursuit of campaign finance reform in the United States of America. This term is quite specific to all activities of the United States. Because other countries probably use different terms, but we just use the term PAC. So at the U.S. federal level, an organization become a PAC when it receives or spends more than $1,000 for the purpose of an influence in federal election and registers with the Federal Election Commission (FEC), according to the Federal Election Commission Act, as amended by the Bipartisan Campaign Reform Act of 2002. You might probably heard of it as the McCain-Feingold Act. At the state level, an organization becomes a PAC according to the state election laws. Okay, so Tony Delorme had TD at TD Hip Hop Media. I'm going to leave the link in the description if you're interested in watch his content. I watch his content every so often, like whenever I can, whenever I have time. I'm kind of a big fan of his work. So he said it's possible for us to dominate local politics, as in city, towns, and counties. Me personally, I don't think it's possible, or should I say, we really do want to dominate those cities, towns, and counties. The reason why I say this is because that I don't think Black America really wants to, despite Tony's warnings. Because from one, how Black America voted in the 2020 U.S. presidential election. The voting record, and how Black America voted. That's the reason. That's one reason why. Two, criticism of Ice Cube's contract with Black America. I did a video on the contract of Black America about what I like about it, and probably some of the things that I don't like about it. Essentially, what it is, it was a plan that Ice Cube had where he was inspired by Dr. Claud Anderson about Powernomics, and Black America said he was MAGA, he was supporting Trump, and well, just look up the story with Ice Cube, which is contract with Black America, and how most of Black America probably perceived it. Most of Black America really didn't support it because they think that it came left field, it came left field, and then they thought that Cube was working with Trump, but no, he was kind of, because all Cube cared about was, Powernomics. So he actually had this framework on what politicians need to follow in order to receive the Black vote. Also, the attitude towards immigration, how I said earlier, lack of desire to practice ethnic aggregation, which is actually for Black people to become Black nationalists and then, take Black families seriously, practice group economics, and then actually trying to become more politically Black nationalists. Also, I haven't really heard of a whole lot of lawsuits to hold the Congressional Black Caucus accountable. We only say words on social media on, the Congressional Black Caucus isn't doing this or that, but there's not really a whole lot of lawsuits or a type of a recall of them to really, discipline them and say okay, you're out, and then we need to get somebody who's Black nationalist and thinking in order to represent, Black America like that. And also, we don't have funding to support our 527 organization political action community to spend money to influence politics in Black America's favor. Also, speaking of those political action committees, many of those larger Black-centric political action communities really aren't Powernomics minded, that I noted. Some of them are left-wing loyal and some of them are right-wing loyal. For example, Black PAC is left-wing and the Black Economic Alliance is also. And then you also have Black America's PAC, BAM PAC, is right-wing. Of course, I prefer a Powernomics, Black nationalist political action community that is neither inherently left-wing and it's not really inherently right-wing. I kind of sort of do like Black Economic Alliance, BEA, because they do advocate for economic progress, but they kind of have a left-wing spin to their candidates' preferences. So the way how they support those left-wing candidates really don't resonate with me. And same with BAMPAC, since they support right-wing candidates, they don't resonate with me either. They don't really have those candidates don't really have a black agenda. Even if they do say that they do have a black agenda, benign neglect. Like benign neglect is just gonna stop everything. So Black America really have to look within themselves to actually take control of their politics. But time will tell if Black America jumps into Powernomics. Me, I am a firm believer of Powernomics, and also I was a firm believer, well, kind of sort of a firm believer in Ice Cube's contract with Black America. I also did a video review, so that's somewhere in this channel. So time will tell. Anyway, as I close out, this is Dawson Discussions, and I'm your host, Nathan L. Dawson Jr. Thank you for watching, and if you like this video, hit the thumbs up button, subscribe, share with your friends, and hit the bell notification. Take care, and I will see you in the next video.